Thank you very much, everybody. Welcome back to the last section of the day, Our first session is all about community journalism. Emma Meese from the Centre for Community Journalism at Cardiff University is going to be talking to Jane Haynes from the brilliant and very newsy Wire Life in the West Midlands. For those of you who don't know, the Centre for Community Journalism is Cardiff University's project to support and train and track hyperlocal sites across the country. They have a network that now contains hundreds of hyperlocal sites, but their relationship with our newsrooms is not always what it should be. So Emma and Jane are going to be talking a bit about that and what we might be able to do to collaborate more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, that was a lovely introduction. I'm Emma Meese, which is like cheese with an M. There's no H, that confuses everyone. I'm really easy to get hold of, so if anyone's got any questions after this, there's on the slides I've got our Twitter handles and everything else. So as Sam said, from the Centre for Community Journalism at Cardiff University. So I was at the BBC for nearly 14 years, and then I left to join the School of Journalism, Media and Cultural Studies at the university to set up the Centre for Community Journalism, which we will refer to as C4CJ because it's less of a mouthful. That was 6 years ago. And we do research, outreach, development and training in the sector. We've got a global network. And more recently, we set up ICNN, which is the Independent Community News Network. So we are a formal representative body for small, independent news publishers right across the UK, of which there are a growing number, and they do the most amazing work. So who's it for? It's for anybody who publishes news in the UK who are small and independent. And what do? We offer advocacy support, we offer a voice, we fight for the rights of the sector, we improve knowledge of the sector, and I come to things like this to see if we can collaborate and work better with other people who work in the local news sector. So our mission is to promote quality journalism, to help address the democratic deficit in news-poor communities, and to help create more jobs in journalism at a community and hyperlocal level. That's it. We haven't got a vested interest in anything else. We just want to make sure that we can help anything that we do. As long as it works towards that aim, then we're happy to give it a go. So, this point, I need to say, do not shoot the messenger. So if anyone's got any of that vegetable left from the vegetable sticks, please don't throw them at me. But some of what I'm going to say is not particularly pretty over the next few slides. So I contacted our members and I said, I've been invited along to speak to regional newspapers about potential collaboration between our sector and other news publishers. Tell me about your experiences. Have you been approached for collaboration? Do you collaborate? Does it work? Does it not work? One response I had was, lol. Followed by, sorry, we'll offer up something slightly more constructive and pop it over to you. So you can see where this is going. So here are just a few of the extracts. They go over 3 slides of the not so good, and then there's one which is a little bit better. So when we were talking about collaboration, these are the kind of things that our members have had to say. What we found is that they give a cock and bull story about being willing to share content, and they do not collaborate. They simply do not. When I launched my title 11 years ago, Northcliffe, as they were then, spent a good 2 years trying every trick in the book to shut me down, but obviously didn't succeed. Since then, the relationship has been of coexistence. I've always enjoyed a good working relationship with Archant, and we often supply photos for their use if they have no resource to do so, which is a reciprocal arrangement. Obviously, the commercial aspect is a little more tenuous, but there's room for all our titles. I've lots and lots to say on this, from good relationships to very poor ones, from sustained good relationships, and that actually goes off to say with some editors, but then in the newsroom is not so good. Our experience with, and I've taken out for the purpose of today, any naming of titles on both sides. Our experience is that they have stolen our photos, almost reprinted our stories, and we feel like we're almost just slave researchers for them. As I say, don't shoot the messenger. Information we publish is regularly picked up and repeated word for word and has been for several years. This week we wrote a 4-line bit about a crash. It was literally cut and pasted as a story. We made a grammatical error in it. That error was repeated. Collaboration is not just crediting in our eyes, it's working together on specific things. As a bloke from a particular news service once told me, they've taken a step back and just look at us to decide if something in our area is worth going out the door to. Somebody else said, I believe my site is frequently used as a news source. To the best of their knowledge, their sites have never been mentioned by the paper and nothing's ever been attributed. There's an acknowledgement that it's natural for people to feed off within the news eco area. In news ecology, it is normal for news providers to feed off each other, but actually some courtesy and good relations are always helpful. This is quite a strong one. Thank you for the opportunity to offload nearly 10 years experience of tangling with a particular news agency, a news publisher. I've tried to jot down a few thoughts, but every time I do, I can feel the bile rising from the pit of my soul. They want to give me a byline while I can sell decent stories or pics to contacts on the Mail, Mirror or Sun for up to £800 a pop. So 50 quid in a byline is not going to do it for me. Actually, they're in the minority if they actually get offered £50 in a byline. That's far more than anybody else seems to get offered. It seems to just be a case of having a credit. Another publisher had a contract with Local World for 2 years. It worked really, really well. Trinity Mirror came in within weeks, triggered 6-month get-out clause, so that relationship doesn't happen anymore. So that particular publisher is open to suggestions of collaboration. Again, it worked well on both sides, but isn't in action at the moment. Again, a photographer from a local paper has just texted one of our photographers who's a volunteer, asking if he will send photos of 3 upcoming events in our town over the next couple of months. And again, stories of copy being taken and not credited, and actually somebody else's byline being put on their work. They never understand that my hyperlocal isn't a member of the public who's popped out their phone and shared a pic on Twitter. Yes, it's a small hyperlocal, but I feel a bit of understanding that being told we will give you a credit is irrelevant. They would pay another news group, so why not budget for a quick and speedy payment to hyperlocals? So this is the slightly better. It's pink, it's a bit brighter. Privately, we speak with 1 or 2 journals and share information as any journal or newsy types would. We're happy with them to use our stuff uncredited, and it appears the reverse is also true. However, there is a fear at times from those sharing to not credit, or they would get into trouble. So they're actively told that if they credit these community and hyperlocal news sites, then they'll get in trouble with the editor. We have no issues in collaborating, but we would like a fair slice of the money being pushed their way by local and national government. We simply cannot survive otherwise. At a local level, we have an amicable relationship with the understaffed and overworked local paper, which has allowed me to carry on with the occasional court report together with an appropriate credit for permission to reproduce when I've been unable to follow a case through to its conclusion. Some good examples of collaboration working. In terms of collaboration, Sky came to me during the general election to help find people and said I could use the resulting video package. Decent. BBC did similar in return for Green Room access to a live hustings event. And some of these points I think are quite important. I agree there are opportunities, but we would need to be treated as respectful equals. To be frank, the general vibe I get is that they look down on us. A city could be better served by better media if we all work together instead of working alone. The dailies can do bigger things like courts, which we don't do, and we can do the community stuff that they don't do. It's important I point out here that some of our members actually do courts, and they do it really well. It's just this particular publisher felt that this would be a good agreement for them. And this, I think, is the most important one. If they go into it thinking they're the Premier League and we're the Parks team, then it's not going to work. So there's that bit out of the way. I'm still alive, no one's thrown anything at me, so that's good. So there's things we can do to collaborate. I think where we are at the moment, if we'd have started this conversation 5 years ago, I think we'd be in a different place. There's always been the will on the side of our members, certainly to collaborate, but as you can see from the experiences I've just read out in the previous slides, they've had their fingers burned, so obviously they're a little bit more apprehensive about entering into further so-called collaborations. But there are some people out there that are still willing to do it. We just need to find a common ground and work out how is that going to work, what does it look like. So there is the Centre for Cooperative Media in the US, and their website is collaborativejournalism.org. They've got some really good examples of how collaborative journalism can work. And they define collaborative journalism broadly as the practice of executing journalistic endeavours using a cross-entity approach. This encompasses news organisations working together and with other non-news entities on reporting projects, partnering on audience engagement effort, co-collecting and sharing data, or even teaming up to build technology that supports multiple organisations working towards a shared journalistic goal. And I think we can agree that all of us in this room and our members are all working towards the same goal of wanting to provide good quality news and information, tackle a democratic deficit in our areas. We just need to find a way of doing that properly. So they have got on the website different information on the variety of different collaborations, and the one that I think that would most likely work from experience of working in both sectors is the ongoing and separate collaborations. I did try screen grabbing it on the train earlier, but it was giving me some gobbledygook. So, but basically, common themes between these collaborations include valuable content sharing benefits, high levels of organisational autonomy, and editorial independence among partners. So, you know, to make it perfectly clear, nobody's saying if you've got an exclusive or you're working on a scoop or you've got something big they're working on, nobody's expecting anybody to hand that over to a rival news publication. What we're talking about is things like if you've got limited resources on the ground with your journalists and there's an election or there's something big in the court and there's something happening in council or there's two big council meetings at the same time, is that actually we start to collaborate and say, well, okay, well, if you go to one and I go to the other. We used to do it. I was a reporter on the Carmarthen Journal 23 years ago, and we always used to do it. If there was something in one court and something happening in the other court, then we would swap notes afterwards. And I think we need to remember that we're kind of all in this for the same aim, but the big difference now is that lots of people in our sector whose content just basically gets stolen, they're either getting paid very little or not getting paid at all. And I have to stress that does not have any impact or correlation to do with the quality of the work or the standard of the journalism. A great number of them actually used to work for regional newspapers and had lost their jobs for whatever reason with the cuts. So they're qualified journalists, and I think it's because they're startup businesses. So you name me any startup business where they're profitable from the beginning. So if you've got a new local bakery and they're a brilliant bakery and they have the best cakes and the best sandwiches, it doesn't make them any less of a bakery just because they're not profitable for the first 6 months or the first year of trading. So you wouldn't go in and suddenly say, well, I'm going to take pastries from your shop because you're not a proper bakery. So actually, when you think about it, members of our sector, just because they're not getting paid, it's just because they're startup businesses, they're micro businesses and sole traders that are just starting out. It doesn't impact on the quality of their work at all. So one example where collaboration and co-working has worked really well is the City Talking and the Yorkshire Evening Post. The City Talking's got a really, really young demographic. Majority of their readers are under 35. And they produce a monthly newspaper. So their newspaper gets distributed in the Yorkshire Evening Post. So they get to deliver 25,000 copies instead of 10,000 copies. And the Evening Post gets access to a greater audience and a younger audience because the City Talking take their audience with them. So there are a number of ways that we can look at collaboration. And I think it's just really important that we start having these conversations. So we've agreed, so Alison and David, we're going to continue conversations after today, but we're really keen to have all your thoughts, your experiences, because there's two sides to every story, and to see if we can find a common ground and see where we move forward from here. But I'm really, really keen to have your thoughts. So just going to end with a quote from the academic lead that runs our projects at the university, and I completely agree with what he says. We believe in the value of local news. We believe it contributes to maintaining a sense of community and to supporting healthy democratic engagement. Digital technologies have allowed communities to redefine the role of news in local areas. And that's true for all of us. And that all we need to do now is to start finding a common ground. So I'm really pleased to hand over to Jane, who is a brilliant journalist and has recently set up her own hyperlocal publication. And Jane's going to give you some of her experience as well. And then we're going to have a conversation with Alison, and we're open to having any questions as well. Thank you. Okay.
Oh, hello. A bit little. Hi, yeah, as it says up there, I'm Jane Haynes. I trained at the Shropshire Star and the Express and Star back when it had a training centre. Later worked on news desks in Swansea and Nottingham. I'm one of those annoying dinosaurs that Keith Harrison referred to, who's not worked in a regional newsroom for a while, but I do like to stick my oar in about the state of regional journalism. I would, though, like to reassure you that my time out of the newsroom hasn't diminished my enthusiasm for our craft, nor my understanding of the challenges that we all face, nor indeed my own eagerness to learn new skills and develop as a digital journalist. This is examples from my fledgling contribution to the media landscape in the West Midlands, called wildlife.co.uk. I set it up in Kidderminster this year. Traditional media interest in the district looks, on the face of it, fairly healthy. There's a weekly Kidderminster shuttle run by NewsQuest. The Express and Star has a daily edition, badged as Dudley and Moor Forest. BBC Hereford Worcester and several commercial radio stations operate there. But as a resident, which most of us are residents of our local areas, I found the reality of how the community was covered was less positive. In recent times, every reporter covering the patch has been made redundant, bar one, or moved to other locations. The Shuttle and the Express and Star both closed their offices in the town. Pardon me. So essentially, it's a community on the margins. We're stuck between Birmingham and Worcester. The economy's struggling. Our identity is rather blurred. Sorry, you'll have to excuse my nerves. I haven't spoken in public for a while. And ad revenues, I expect, are pretty diminished. As a result, it seems to me that nobody locally was reporting in any depth about the issues affecting my 100,000 strong community, nor properly holding local politicians and influencers to account. The same people and self-interest were regularly the source of, and often the only voice in stories. There was a real lack of diversity. It was clear to me there was a void that I felt needed filling, and space for an alternative voice. I know many other community journalists around the country have been motivated by the same circumstances. I mean, in a perfect world, there'd be no space for us. A regional media in rude health just would not have enabled that gap to grow, particularly in marginalised communities like mine. But here we are, a growing number of community-based and alternative news operations with increasing influence and reach. Many are moving forwards towards commercial sustainability. So I guess the question I'd ask the room is, what are you going to do about the independent news sector? Nothing or something. You could ignore us, which some do, and treat us as an irrelevance. You could actively try to kill us off, or you could instead work with us, nurture partnerships, and where possible, join forces. I think that's particularly true in communities like mine that really need and deserve a media that fights for them. All I'd urge you to do is to start a conversation. You'll almost certainly find that independent media ventures are run by committed, enthusiastic people who care about their communities, give up their time, often for little or no reward, at least initially. They're part of their communities, not apart from it. Many like me will also have experience and insight that we'd be happy to share. There will be some, of course, on both sides who really don't want to have that discussion, who are happy to stay separate. Equally, there will be those who will welcome the chance to build a trustworthy, two-way, mutually beneficial arrangement with you. So what could collaboration look like? Well, it could take many forms, depending on the ambitions and motivations of both parties. It could be about sharing meetings diaries, ensuring crucial community events are covered. It could be about joint working to investigate crucial issues, using joint resources and content to mutually agreed release dates. It could, and probably should, involve reaching financial arrangements. Money almost certainly will have to change hands. That's it. Thank you.
And I think after you've seen some of the responses, it's like, Thank you. That's better. So what do we do? So I've worked with hyperlocals over my career, or I've certainly known people who have like left the industry and started hyperlocals or started up on their own. And as you say, like they are a part of the fabric of kind of local media now. And things like the words that we saw in green really don't make great reading. They don't make you feel great. You know, when I see the Daily Mail has cut and pasted our reporter's copy and run it word for word on there, or taken photos, makes me feel shit. You know, I can relate completely to people who are working and uploading content to their blogs and are finding that's being done to them. So it really is about how do we find a way where we work with respect, with collaboration, and you know, opportunities that might arise on both sides. We do have an issue these days where we can't be everywhere as, you know, local news organisations. We do need to collaborate more and kind of be receptive to that. So I think it's a really great opportunity to start the conversation. I believe, I don't know if people from there are in the room, but there do seem to be news brands here that are working with their local hyperlocals. If you do that, it'd be really great if you kind of stuck your hand up and I'll come to you with the mic and maybe you could tell us a bit about it. Right. I'm conscious of time, but I do want to hear that. Go on then.
Yes, we've got a hyperlocal in a small town of Crewkerne, and they came to us. It's run by a lady who used to work for Pullman's Weekly News years ago. She's got a very small operation. She came to me. I was the editor of the Western Gazette at the time, and she said, can we work together? At the time, I was scaling back our operation. I knew I wouldn't be able to have a big focus on that town because it wasn't bringing us the audience we needed. So what we have now is an agreement that we pay her, and we use all of her content that she uses on her small site, and it essentially fills the Crewkerne edition, and it works perfectly. It's a really, really good arrangement.
Thank you. Thanks, Em. Anybody else? Yeah. I can't see, but I haven't worn my glasses. So, I mean, I think that there are real opportunities that we could try for and build from this. You know, painful truths can lead to kind of new ways of doing things. So certainly we're going to start talking about how we do that. And I'll hand back to you so you can talk a bit more.
That's fine. I think the other thing is that I just want to clarify is that some people are a bit worried about the quality and the standard of the content. It is an outdated view to kind of just the blogger in the bedroom. Those days have gone. And by being a member of ICNN, all our members adhere to the Editor's Code of Practice. They have access to, they have a robust complaints procedure. They have access to David Banks, who's a media law expert, so he's on call at any time, so they have full legal support. There is a quality standard before you can actually become a member, so it's not that the quality of the standard is poor by any stretch of the imagination. I'd be really interested to find out, hands up, who would want to collaborate with a hyperlocal. And it's absolutely fine if you don't. This is not for us to say you have to in one way or another. But in the same way as our sector have been quite honest, would you want to collaborate? Few hands up. What percentage would you say? Like tenuous. Does anybody have any questions? Does anybody think what I've said is absolutely outrageous and how dare I stand here today and say such a thing at your conference?
Hi there. I'm interested in the lady who has the content sharing agreement. Do you use their copy on your own website or just in print?
We tend. Oh, there we go. It's very much community content, so we don't tend to use very much at all online. It creates that valuable community content for our printed product. So I'd say once in a blue moon, she might uncover something that will get us an audience on Somerset Live.
Okay, thanks. And to the guys on stage, in the early days of hyperlocals, and you know, to some extent, perhaps today as well, there's sometimes the feeling that hyperlocals are guilty of the same practices that perhaps we're being accused of here of copying and pasting from rivals' websites. Do you see it's just a one-way street now, or do you think that there's examples of hyperlocals that are perhaps guilty of those same practices?
Not everyone, not everybody in our sector is going to be perfect, but from what we've seen and the research that we've done, it is more one-sided in terms of the community reporters. The hyperlocals still embedded in their community, so they're the ones that actually are on the ground speaking to people a lot more, because a lot of regional journalists are now in centralised offices. So so actually somebody that's there on the ground is more likely to get the quote first, or to be there for whatever the incident may be, and to go to the community events. I'd be interested to know if anybody's had a bad experience of working with a hyperlocal. No? That's good.
I was just going to come back on that because, the only content I carry is exclusive stuff that I've worked on myself. I'm not interested in trying to compete in that space of community news, what's on, events previews, because there's a newspaper doing that perfectly well. What concerns me is that the kind of issues that really do matter in my community, that really need a light shining on them, that's just not happening. There isn't the time, there isn't the resources. There's one reporter based 10 miles away trying to fill a paper every week and all the online content. So me to try to compete with that would be pointless, in my opinion, and it wouldn't do my community any good. So in a way, I quite like that they follow up stuff I've done, because they've got a much bigger audience, because ultimately I want the stuff I uncover, or the stories I do, to reach the people who matter, and for them to be a bit shaken up by stuff. They're probably not going to do that just through a small hyperlocal that they can kind of almost think, well, they've not got much of an audience, we'll be okay. But if the BBC pick it up and run it, they might have to sit up and take notice. So I understand, there is that process that some of us want to go through. But I think having that recognition and possibly, ultimately some cash for the initial effort would be a really good step forward. And collaborating on other issues would be, in advance. So rather than picking it up, that we've arranged in advance that I'm doing this, I've dug up this, it'll be all ready on Thursday, do you want to run it at the same time? That kind of collaboration, I think, would be really beneficial on both sides.
I'd like to also say there's obviously a collaboration which happens between all journalists with the Bureau Local, and there seems to be that acceptance that it's absolutely fine for everybody to come together to work on one subject, and then you get these amazing data sets, and everybody goes off and does work from it, and that's obviously on a bigger scale, more kind of topic related for certain things, and that work is fantastic. And I'd like to see more of that kind of collaboration, but just on a day-to-day basis, that understanding that if we can work on a big project together and we can share data sets and information and make our own content out of it, why can't we out of day-to-day things? So I think we're quite short on time. Yes, yes. However, I'm going to be around for the rest of the day. I'm like a bad smell. I don't go away. So if anybody's got any questions, and after today, please get in touch. Any questions, even if they're, something you might think is silly, or something that you want to come back on anything I've said, that's absolutely fine, because I think the starting point is to have a healthy and honest and robust conversation surrounding where we are and what the next steps are moving forward. So if anybody is interested in collaborating or finding out any more, then please come and have a chat. Thank you for listening.
So just to wind up, I'm going to say, if you want to know more about the work, it's on Twitter, C4CJ. I would give them a follow. We're going to set something up so we can have a conversation. If you're interested in being a part of that, grab Emma, grab me, grab we will make it happen so that there's a hangout. It doesn't need to be a real world thing, but we can start having that conversation around how we work together, improve relations where we need to, start new ones where they don't exist at the moment, and take it forward in a really positive way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Jane and to Emma and to Alison.